Good morning and welcome everyone. Today we're going to talk about RADV audits. And if you haven't been paying close attention to this topic, now's the time to start. CMS has made some major changes to this program, and it hits close to home for everyone for how we document at the point of care. So I want to walk through an overview of what you need to know. So this is kind of our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the basics of what RADV is, walk through how the audit process works, and also look at what CMS changed in 2025. We're going to compare RADV to OIG audits and go through what good documentation actually looks like. And then close with a practical checklist that you can take back to your teams. So we've got a lot of ground to cover. So we'll go ahead and get moving. Okay, first of all, what's RADV? RADV stands for Risk Adjustment Data Validation. So in plain terms, this is how CMS checks whether the diagnosis that health plans submit for payment are actually backed up by what's in the medical record. These diagnosis codes drive the RAF score, the Risk Adjustment Factor score, which determines how much the plan gets paid under a managed care plan, Medicare Advantage. So if the documentation doesn't support the code, we've got a problem. Three things are at the core of every RADV review. They are the RAF scores, and are they accurate? Does the record actually support the diagnosis? And do the payments reflect the patient's true health status? And that's really the whole ball game right there. And the audit process is pretty straightforward. CMS selects a sample of enrollees from a plan's contract. The plan pulls and submits the medical records supporting every HCC-linked diagnosis. If you're not familiar with these terms, CMS, HCC, all this, please go back and review my previous videos where I do discuss these things. CMS, HCC are hierarchical condition categories. CMS reviews those records against risk adjustment guidelines, and if they find unsupported diagnoses, they calculate an error rate that can now be applied across the entire contract. It's extrapolated. The bottom line here for providers is this: the documentation burden is yours. If the note doesn't clearly support the diagnosis, the code may not hold up under review. And that's regardless of anything else the plan has submitted. CMS made some significant moves in 2025. Historically, they audited about 60 Medicare Advantage contracts a year. Now it's going to be more than 550 plans under annual review. They are expanding their coding team from 40 auditor reviewers to 2,000. And if that's not enough, they're using new technology, think AI, to find unsupported diagnoses faster. Over the next decade, CMS projects $4.7 billion in recoveries. Three changes matter the most for providers. Extrapolation is now applied, so a small error rate can snowball across an entire contract. The fee-for-service adjuster buffer is gone, and that means that every unsupported HCC is treated as 100% overpayment. And submission windows are compressed. They're now 12 to 20 weeks, so there's no time to play catch-up when a request comes in. If all that's not bad enough, this is the slide I really want people to sit with. One documentation gap doesn't create one problem. It sets off a chain reaction. The gap leads to an audit finding. That finding generates an error rate. The error rate gets extrapolated across the full contract. Then comes the repayment demand, and the plan may come back to the provider for a clawback. So downstream, star ratings can take a hit, future contracts may tighten, and you're more likely to get audited again. So every step after that first one is preventable. Complete specific documentation at the point of care stops the whole thing before it starts. It really is that simple. So I get asked about this one a lot. So let's clear that up. RADV and OIG audits are not the same thing. RADV is CMS driven, proactive, and now it's routine for every eligible plan. We can expect it. OIG audits are investigative. They get triggered by something specific, like a pattern in claims data, an anomaly, maybe a whistleblower. The outcomes are also in a completely different league. A RADV finding leads to a repayment demand. An OIG finding, on the other hand, can lead to civil or criminal penalties. They both require solid documentation, but if an OIG audit lands on your doorstep, the stakes are on another level entirely. So knowing is half the battle. What's CMS looking for? What can we do to prevent this? So CMS uses the acronym MEET, Monitor, Evaluate, Assess, Treat, to determine whether a diagnosis is supported. You only need one of these 4 elements in the note, but of course, the more you have, the stronger the record is under review. The big thing I want to drive home is specificity. A note that just says diabetes may not cut it. A note that documents type 2 diabetes with diabetic CKD stage 3 gives the auditor exactly what they need. It gives them the full specificity on that diagnosis. Documentation also has to happen in a face-to-face encounter. That's just required, and in the current service year. So you can't pull something from a previous service year to support this year. And in addition to that, they actually are requiring it. They're requiring evidence in the date of service that the diagnosis is coded of that diagnosis was addressed at the time of the visit. So that kind of eliminates that previous year issue. The 2 warning items on the right are the most common things we see flagged. Documentation that doesn't support the diagnosis, and acute codes that get recaptured incorrectly. We see these over and over again. If your patient had a UTI 2 years ago and they have a UTI today, don't code that UTI without putting your clinical validation in your notes. Refer to your labs or whatever criteria you use to make that diagnosis. Mention your care plan, the antibiotic you're prescribing, or whatever you're doing. Otherwise, it just looks like you're carrying forward an acute diagnosis. There's no evidence that that patient had that diagnosis on that date of service. It just looks like maybe something cloned, right? So this is especially important for acute diagnoses. Also, make sure you're not cloning forward strokes and MIs, because if you code an acute stroke in the outpatient setting, you're going to get nailed. This is the biggest one, okay? What is coded in the outpatient setting is stroke sequela. Lasting effects from the stroke, and they fall under Z codes. For MIs, after the first month, they're no longer a current MI. They then become an old MI. So the code changes for that as well. It changes to I-25.2, which is an old MI. So these guidelines are important, especially for the acute diagnoses. If you're unsure, ask your coder. Reach out to a coder. Everyone should have access to a coder that can help them. And if not, reach out to me. Okay. So preparation, of course, is key, and it has to be ongoing, not something you throw together after CMS contacts you. There's four areas. There are 4 areas to focus on: documentation practice at the point of care, your MEET. Again, monitor, evaluate, assess, treat. Specificity. They're not just diabetic; they have diabetes type 2 with X complication, CKD. Okay, and they don't just have CKD; they have stage 3 CKD, right? Important things. Linking diagnoses to medications and treatment plans. I recommend that you keep your, and I know most providers do this, MAs do it, keep the med lists up to date. You can also have your MAs look to see if they can find documentation that tells them what that medication is for. Not guessing, because they know what the medication's used for, but do they actually see it documented? And if that linkage is there and that documentation is there, then you're meeting those documentation requirements. Or if you're linking your diagnosis to your treatment plan, okay, which your medication is part of your treatment plan, right? So it all falls under MEET. Main thing is just not a diagnosis sitting there alone with nothing else. An internal audit program, regular chart reviews and mock RADV exercises are good so that you can find the gaps before CMS does. Keeping in mind that if you do find gaps, you do have to report those within a specific time frame. So when you go to do a mock audit, make sure you understand the reporting criteria of anything you find. Provider education. Providers need to understand not just what to document, but why it matters. So that provider education is important. If they don't understand the why, then we're spinning our wheels, right? And for audit response readiness, your team should know exactly who handles what and how to pull records quickly if a request comes in. It's a good idea to have an official documented audit plan with assigned roles. And please reach out if I can help you with a framework for that as well. So the 4 things I'd like you to take away from today, and we'll wrap this up. RADV is now an annual event for essentially every Medicare Advantage plan. It's not an if, it's a when will we be audited. So this isn't a one and done situation. The financial exposure is real, and especially real with extrapolation and no fee-for-service adjuster buffer. Documentation quality is your best protection, and it starts with the provider at the point of care. And preparation has to be continuous. You can't wait until the audit letter shows up to start getting your house in order. If you have questions or you want to dig into documentation for specific HCC categories, I'm always willing to help, and you are welcome to reach out. You'll see my email on the slide, or you can go to the website and submit the form there. Thanks so much for your time and attention today, and I hope this is beneficial. If it is, I'd appreciate your subscribing, liking, sharing, thumbs up, all that good stuff. All right, have a great day.